All right, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So good evening and welcome. My name is Brian Crooks, and I am the Interim Planning Services Manager with Richland County's Community Planning and Development Department. So my division is involved with developing and implementing plans, policies, and projects related to growth and development within unincorporated Richland County. So with me tonight is Ms. Jessica Mackey, County Councilperson for District 9, as well as Mr. Jeff Munkle from both Infrastructure and Environment, the consultant tasked with leading the ReDiscover Sandhills process. So we appreciate everyone joining us tonight to learn more about the ReDiscover Sandhills plan. We hope everyone has had time to read through and review the plan over the last couple of weeks. Those who have been following along with us through the process will notice a lot of familiar pieces with some new sections, including the community profile and public engagement information section. In just a short little while, we will be providing an overview of the plan, including the process to date, the engagement points held, and ultimately the various recommendations and interventions that make up the plan. So we will be taking comments and questions in the chat box. So feel free to begin submitting those throughout the presentation, and we will address those in the order that we receive them later on as part of the meeting. In addition, we are recording the meeting, so those who missed the meeting or join us late will have the opportunity to view the presentation this evening on the county's YouTube page. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Mackey for a few words, and then we will have Jeff lead us through the overview for ReDiscover Sandhills. Ms. Mackey?
Yes, thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Mackey, council member for District 9. I'm thankful to have so many of you attend this public meeting tonight virtually. And even along the way, there's been a great deal of participation. So I'm grateful for everyone that has provided their comments and looking forward to hearing more of your comments and suggestions tonight. Thank you to county staff, as well as the consultants that have helped do work on this plan and get us to this point, as well as thank you to former Councilman Chip Jackson, who helped begin this plan and this process several years ago to get us to the point that we are right now. And so I look forward to receiving these final comments and updating the document and taking it to full county council very soon.
All right, thank you, Ms. Mackey. So my name is Jeff Minkle, as Brian said. I'm with both companies, a local planning consultant there in Columbia. And I have been lucky to be the project manager to oversee this ReDiscover Sandhills neighborhood plan over the past year and a half or so. So I do wish we are all in person. These type of things, I love presenting these projects, you know, after we've done so many great things over the last year and a half, and I know it probably resonates so much better, the things I'm going to talk about, you know, there's a lot of great images that came out of this and future concepts we're talking about, but you know, unfortunately, you know, this is where we're at. Hopefully this will give you a good idea over this next few minutes of where we're at with this planning process. So this little agenda right here, I'm going to take a short time to go over a couple key areas of the new plan. Brian touched on this a bit already, but I'll kind of go over what the planning effort is and where it is. We'll take a deep dive into the public engagement activities that all took place over the last year and a half. And we'll also run through all the intervention outcomes that are now drafted as part of the plan based upon all the information we've received so far. Next slide, Brian. So first off, where is this planning effort centered around? If you haven't really been following this, as you can see from this map, it is essentially an area in northeast Richland County. Basically, anyone kind of gets centered around this by knowing that it's east of the village at Sandhill Shopping Center. So the encompassing borders here are an area east of Two Notch Road, south of Spears Creek Church Road, and it's also bisected by Clemson Road. The planning area is very unique as it encompasses a whole slew of different land uses within it. We have active residential areas, including the Royal Pines Estate subdivision to the south, the Spears Creek Mobile Home Community to the north. There's a series of drainage and environmental lands bisecting the planning area. And we also have considerable commercial industrial properties, both within the boundaries as well as bordering the boundaries throughout and surrounding the planning area. This includes the Richfield Northeast Industrial Park, as well as many small businesses in the Pontiac area, which basically are around the intersection of Two Notch Road and Spears Creek Church Road. Next slide. So as Brian noted, the effort started off about a year and a half ago with basically a systematic approach of the goals that are shown on the screen in front of you right now. The first steps were analyzing the area. We really looked at the existing conditions and thoroughly reviewed all topics from transportation to housing to business, recreation, and safety, which we'll talk a lot more about here in a second. A series of issues and opportunities were identified, and those were identified based on the analyzation we did in the first phase, but also with partnerships with the public, which I'll get into as well. The combination of the analysis and community engagement resulted in a good amount of recommendations, or what we call interventions as well. Those two terms kind of go hand in hand, you'll find, as we talk about this tonight. Of course, once the plan is adopted, the county intends to work yearly to implement the recommendations or interventions for the plan in the coming year. As mentioned, this whole planning effort was done with community engagement and stakeholder involvement throughout. This plan in particular is not meant to be created in a vacuum, but with full transparency to the public, knowing that it's the residents and businesses with the historical knowledge around here and the needs that can truly shape this neighborhood plan and make it real once it's adopted. Next slide, Brian. So with that, I really want to focus a little bit on the public engagement. If you haven't been around this plan in the last year and a half, there is just a wealth of public engagement that took place of this plan. In fact, as a planner for over 20 years, it honestly was the most public engagement, most unique public engagement efforts for a plan this size that I've ever been a part of. And you see right on the screen right now a group of public engagement items that took place. First off, during this time, there was a standalone website created that was basically a placeholder of all the documents created over the last year and a half. Also led people to different techniques for giving input, such as survey or email, as well as to find out about what's going on for different meeting times over the last couple of years. Also, social media was well involved. Brian and myself would help out giving posts to Richland County, and Richland County is very active in ensuring that meetings were posted out there, as well as links to surveys throughout the last year and a half as well. Then we had a series of a couple of neighborhood meetings, and these were orchestrated more or less with, in particular, with the Homeowner Association of the Royal Pines Estate Subdivision, but also directly with representatives of different residences that own properties or might be actually tenants in some of the properties in the north and south areas of our planning area. The stakeholder meetings also kind of built upon those individual neighborhood meetings. So not only did we have some personal meetings with residents of the area, we also had actually personal meetings back when we could meet together face to face with a number of groups, including neighborhood reps, area businesses, including businesses that own property in the area and tenants, local utility reps, the Department of Transportation. And it was recognized that there were a key group of stakeholders with excellent knowledge and history of living or conducting business in the Sandhills area. And it just helped us provide more information of what could be outcomes of helping this area thrive in the future. There were, as noted in there, we had two different surveys. We had a first survey, and this is back actually at the end of 2019. The first survey was put out via SurveyMonkey online and made known well through social media, as well as postcards sent individually to all owners in the area. And that first survey had a lot of questions really gauging what people's issues and what opportunities they see as they live in their own environment or they conduct business in their environment within the community. At that survey, we had about 110 responses at that time, and all that data went into our initial drafting of thoughts and recommendations. A second survey was then done later on, once we drafted some of the recommendations, And actually the draft recommendations were put out verbatim in the survey to the people again, and they're all notified by postcards as well for everyone to individually say, yes or no, we like their recommendation, or you could improve upon it in this way. So we were able to really get some good information about the recommendations that were initially drafted. Then lastly, we did have 2 planning charrettes. And what I mean by a charrette, if you're not familiar, basically it's a public meeting, but I consider it to be, it's a public meeting that's much more interactive and hands-on. And if you were able to be a part of our 2 charrettes, which both took place at the Richland Sandhills Library, you would basically know what I mean. It was these meetings took place to really engage people. We had some unique opportunities for people to interact and give us their opinions in a different way than just writing something on a survey. The charrettes were posted well by Richland staff. In fact, they went door to door in the days before to encourage people to come. Postcards were written in both English and Spanish and sent out as well. And we did have some good crowds that came in. The first charrette had a breakout interactive section where people placed dots on preferences of how they saw recreation and business in the community. And then the second charrette had visual preference surveys, also had a mapping exercise where people came and talked to us individually and looked at a map and really told us based visually, what they want to see, better in the community, what are issues to them personally and how they interact with the environment there. So they were definitely, this public engagement was pretty all encompassing. Next slide, Ryan. And this next one is just kind of a quick image of what that public engagement looked like. And honestly, I have to say that, these images and what I said doesn't do it justice. Again, I just want to give a shout out. The Richland staff went above and beyond even the things that, both that we put out there for public engagement. Again, as many of the neighbors might know, they went door to door to get people to look and say, let's fill out these surveys. Let's talk about, they come to the meetings. They also placed road signs out there as well to encourage people. So again, a lot of great public engagement took place as part of this. Next slide. So now I want to take the rest of the time to jump into what the draft interventions or recommendations are for the outcomes from the plan that came in all the analysis and public engagement. In drafting the planning document, all the interventions are found right up front in the front of the document. We go right into what the vision is for the community and what those recommendations are. So that's, the beef of the plan. What you're seeing here on the screen right now is actually the vision map. So while there's recommendations written out verbally in the plan, there is this vision map at the forefront that tries to encompass all the recommendations in kind of a geographical format, so people can visually see, what things that, the county is going to look to work on over the coming years to make these outcomes come to reality. So let's take a deep dive right now and we'll get into some of these recommendations. So next slide, please. So out of all of our analysis, it was pretty evident there was some core topics for that we could develop recommendations under. And the core topics ended up being transportation, recreation, business, beautification of the area, housing, and then some safety elements. And so I kind of broke these down into those topics right now. And the first one you see right up on here is transportation. So one of the first recommendations under transportation is reconstruct Spears Creek Church Road. Now, many of you know that the reconstruction of Spears Creek Road is scheduled and should happen in the future. And we knew that going in through this planning effort. But in talking to the people and knowing that the outcome is going to happen, the plan goes on to say, when Spears Creek Church Road is reconstructed, the plan would like some thoughtful outcomes in that design, if at all possible. So it talks in there to give consideration of trying to create a village feel with the reconstruction when you're reconstructing the intersection of Two Notch Road and Spears Creek Church Road. That's, a big intersection for possible future business and that kind of activity. It goes on to talk that, when the design happens, that we want to make sure we're encouraging proper XL and decel turning lanes for added safety. And then also that there's encouragement in the plan that when that road is reconstructed, that if we can introduce any shared use paths for pedestrian safety in the area and help out with recreation, that's another encouragement as well. The second bullet point you see in there is traffic enhancements. Well, it was found that from the people that, safety and traffic was a big element of this. And so while many of the roads are in the jurisdiction of the South Carolina DOT, there's no reason that this plan can't recognize some of those intersections and point that, Richland County staff throughout the years can help a partnership with SCDOT and, let them know that, hey, we have interest in some of these intersections. So the plan goes on to say to try and assure proper pedestrian access control at certain intersections, and hopefully prepare new traffic studies to determine future infrastructure upgrades to intersections. And specifically, the plan calls out a couple intersections, such as 2-Notch and Fashion Drive, 2-Notch and Burmaster Drive, 2-Notch and Spears Creek Church Road, and 2-Notch and Sparkleberry Lane. So basically all along 2-Notch. And again, the idea of this intervention is to show the DOT that there's vested interest in here in the future safety of those intersections, and whatever we can do to help each other to realize some more pedestrian intersection safety is what we're looking for in the future. Railroad. So there is a railroad running along basically the western and northern boundary of the planning area. It's operated by CSX Railroad, and it came up in that this railroad area sometimes it doesn't look as beautified, I suppose, when you're going by it or crossing it. And so the plan calls out to try and be a partner with the railroad company, looking to look for a rail corridor beautification, possible vegetation cleanup, litter cleanup, any opportunity to improve the railroad crossing for vehicles, pedestrians, and bikes. Then bus service. The Comet bus service was one of our big stakeholder meetings. We talked to them directly. I came up a lot with different individuals in the community that, the bus service is dependent, people depend on the bus service, some for their daily activities and for work, as well as maybe trying to get to activities in downtown Columbia. So there's a whole intervention here that a partnership should be continually discussed with the Comet bus service, look to try and enhance the existing bus stops and routes that are in the area. And those are all identified in the plan where those locations are, possibly add new bus shelters in certain locations as well. People also brought up during our discussions of other possible locations where it'd be nice to have the bus service go by. And so those are noted in the plan as well for Richland County to kind of be a partner with the Comet in the future and see if we can communicate other areas for different routes that might help the greater good of the public in the community. Next slide, thank you. So next topic, recreation conservation. And this ended up being a very large topic. We had great public input on this one. You could definitely tell that recreation and conservation was near and dear to the local residents and obviously their future quality of life. So the first one on there, Clemson Sandhill Research Partnership. As you know, that's just outside the boundaries here. This would be just, basically northwest of our boundaries. But we did talk to the research facility, and basically the intervention goes on to say that the county should talk to the Clemson Sandhill Research Center annually and look for opportunities to utilize those grounds for public educational programs and events, and include discussions on how maybe the public can have access. As you may know, people have had access in the distant past for trail systems there and everything right now. The current policy of that research center is that they are more of a closed facility due to a lot of the research that goes on there. And so to mix the public in there has been tough over the years. But we have talked to them and having discussions about, how can this be more of a community place for education center opportunities? And they've been open to that. So that's discussed in the plan. Exploring new recreational opportunities. There was a key group of recreational opportunities became evident when talking to people analyzing the area. And those are kind of the sub bullet points there. thoughts on a place to go for a dog park. Many people brought up possibility for a community center to have some recreational space and for people to work out and communicate with each other. Outdoor recreation green space, we had some people talk about that more athletic space would be desired in the area for different types of recreation from young to old. Pocket parks, the individual neighborhoods such as Royal Pines and to the north around Spears Creek, that, is there an area for them to just kind of a destination, maybe a little playground to go to? And then greenway parks. Already, as I mentioned before, basically in the center of our planning area where the industrial park is, the Richland Northeast Industrial Park there, just to the north of there is an area known as Roadway Lake, that some of you might be familiar of, and more or less, conservation drainage area in there. And there's thoughts in this plan of, how can we enhance that conservation area, connect people to it, maybe some off-road trails, and just kind of create a new type of area of passive recreation. So that's all called out in the plan as opportunities here, and recognize in some of our vision map of possibilities of locations where any of these places could occur in the future. The other big one that came out of this is just walkability. And that really came out that, just for people to run or walk or get out of their house and be safe in walking, how can we do this better moving forward? And so the vision of this plan does have the possibility of creating a walkability loop per se. And that walkability loop, if you had a chance to look at the vision map, really does go, it has a potential of interconnecting the neighborhoods, but also interconnecting some of the major roadways as well. We already know that Spears Creek Church Road will, possibly redesigned and reconstructed, and that could be the possible north side of the walkability loop. But there's going to need to be ways to work with developers, work with the community to add a lot more of these trails to make a full loop. But at least the concept is there in this plan, and that, we want to start trying to pursue something like that just to help increase safety of the area and give people more recreational opportunities. And in fact, yeah, you can go to the next slide right away there, Brian. And there is a separate whole map specifically for recreation and conservation visions, for more or less. On this screen is a concept of how inside of the Royal Pines Estates subdivision, that rendering on the left, there's some open space areas in there already. How can maybe that be reutilized for some passive trails that can connect to the Roadway Lake area to the north and the industrial park? This map also conceptually pictures, where the walkability loop might be able to go around, follow some of the major roadways, but also some of the interior roadways in the subdivision as well. So again, these are conceptual, of course, but these are a direct result of, the info received and of people wanting to try and be safer and have more recreation opportunities. So they're outlined more in the plan itself. All right. We go on to the next slide there. There we go. And so another aspect was beautification. One of the big things that came out was, how can the look and the feel of this area have more of a sense of place? How can it be cleaner in some areas? And so working in partnerships with some of the subdivisions there, the residents and the businesses, some of these interventions came out of beautification. One in particular that came up, Two Notch Road propane tank, right there on the corner of, the northwest corner of Fashion Drive and Two Notch. Many of you are familiar with it. There's a big propane tank right there in the midst of, this gateway to some nice businesses around that area. And so there's discussion in there of, working with the utility and how can we, clean that up if it, can't be removed, maybe working with it to have some more aesthetic qualities to it, painting or some art type of. There's discussions in the plan about having an adopt a road cleanup program. Some of the local roads, such as J Bay Road, which is to the north of the planning area, more rural in nature, but has been prone to have some outdoor storage left around and some different type of litter. And so we talked in the plan that, working with the local homeowners associations and some of the residents, we can maybe have an adopt a road cleanup program in there to start combating some of those issues. Road streetscaping. There's a number of things which I'll hit on in a second when we get to the business section, but we talk in the plan of when roads are recreated, redesigned, such as Spears Creek Church Road, what can we do to try and get other elements that create more of a sense of place for a given area? And road streetscaping is one of them. So there's some renderings in there of how that might look on certain roads in the community by just adding some trees and working with the DOT or the county when these future designs come in for the new roadway improvements. Neighborhood improvement program. This is basically already in place for them for the most part. I know that Richland County already has their neighborhood, but it just kind of recalls out that the county will regularly meet with these local neighborhoods in this study area to help educate them on the county neighborhood improvement program and any other county resources for encouraging any type of neighborhood stewardship. And then an element came out of this recommendation of a property maintenance awareness. A lot of residents brought up that not everyone necessarily may take care of their properties the same as they do, right? And that can happen in neighborhoods. But there is a point that some property maintenance, might be going against certain ordinances. And so the plan does call for creating a mailing annually that discusses property maintenance requirements of the county code, and that's sent out to area subdivisions. And so basically the neighborhoods we talked to wanted to see that promoted. Just that not necessarily that you're going out and policing these type of things. That's not the intent of this plan, but just to make people more aware of what the property maintenance standards are, and so that everyone's at the same level from year to year. All right, Brian, we'll go to the next one. All right, so general business. This ended up being a very the end of this plan as well. If you dig further in, you see that there's a neat concept of business in the area and how we can hopefully promote new business to come to the area and see things redevelop as well. So one of the first elements that came out of, or interventions that came out of this, is development improvement program. There's a little map down there to the right, which gives you a little indication, but basically we did indicate that there are a number of parcels in the planning area and just outside the planning area that are vacant at this time or could use possibility for redevelopment. And so those are all called out in the plan and discussed as what their use is now or what their use could be. And the plan goes on to say that the county wants to try and promote the development of these existing industrial and commercial opportunities and that are found there today, and hopefully work in cooperation with local brokerage firms, to get those moving for development, or obviously the Richland County Economic Development Office. The second one there is development incentives. So the plan, we found from talking to some of the businesses around there that people do have aspirations of investing in their property, investing in their businesses, but a lot of times communities find that equal investment does help lead to a better product. So the plan goes on talking about to try and look at and talking to businesses more in the coming years and figuring out what incentive programs might be best incorporated in this area to help spur local business investment by either tenants themselves or owners. And maybe these investment programs could go towards site and structure upgrades, as well as possibly demolition of vacant or underutilized properties so they can be redeveloped again in the future. And some coordination hopefully for these type of incentive programs could happen through the Richland County Economic Development Office or other incentive mechanisms, such as tax increment districts or business improvement districts. But the plan goes on to kind of talk a little bit more about that in depth as well. And then the last one there, as far as general business goes, we kind of talked about maintenance of residential properties, but same can be said for business properties. And so the plan does talk about that annually enforcing site maintenance and the original approval standards that businesses agreed to when they came in the community should take place, just to make sure that upkeep of landscaping, enclosed refuse, possible removal, unapproved signage, is all done and everyone's operating at the same level. And all businesses, are following the local ordinances as well. It hopefully can just create a more cohesive environment in the business districts. Next one. So there is 3 corridors or business district areas in particular that were found, either within this planning area or directly adjacent to it, that we took basically a deeper dive into because they each had their own characteristics. And those 3 are right there. There was the 2-notch business corridor. And so this is basically all the western portion of our boundary of 2-notch road, the businesses, that are just east of the village at Sandhill Shopping Center. All those along 2-notch, that business corridor, that's kind of its own one essential district. The Clemson Road industrial area, that's all along Clemson Road and essentially is the Richland Northeast Industrial Park. And then the Pontiac downtown corridor. As many of you know, the intersection of businesses and homes around Spears Creek Church Road and 2-notch Road is kind of known as the Pontiac area, has been historically. But those businesses were known as the Pontiac downtown corridor. So all 3 of these areas we found that are essentially different. One is industrial, one is more high-end commercial, more of a historic type of commercial. And so there are some different interventions about each one of these areas. And they more or less fall around the same type items you see at the bottom of the screen there. So for example, creating a sense of place. The plan talks about the 2-notch business corridor area to try and create its own identity as we go forward in the future, and maybe be known as more of the Sandhills retail corridor. We already have the village of Sandhill Shopping Center around there, but so that this corridor of businesses may become known as the Sandhills retail corridor. And how can we coordinate other improvements that are discussed in this plan, such as street trees, banners, maybe some signage, all utilizing maybe that same theme as we progress in the years to kind of create a new sense of place. Both the 2-notch business corridor and the Clemson Road industrial area, we also have in the plan, in the appendix of the plan, some thoughts on implementing a new design guide. And so instead of when businesses do come in or they want to redevelop in the commercial area, industrial area, it's always nice to have a possible design guide to kind of show them different types of architecture or site planning that you'd like to see for those areas. So hopefully as the corridors or the industrial park really take shape and new businesses come in, you kind of start seeing a theme as you drive through. That it seems similar in architecture and how they design a site, what they put into their signage or landscaping. And so as part of this plan, there is this draft of design guides that could be implemented for these corridors as new businesses come in, and kind of provide them a guide or direction of how we want to see different design elements take place. And that does also go into talking about, as I mentioned before, what can we do in these corridors, such as even streetscaping at the DOT and county level, to make these areas have more of a sense of place, more of a better place to do business, wherever they're at. The Pontiac downtown corridor area does go on to have a bit more, I guess, intense interventions or discussions than maybe the 2-notch business core and Clemson Road industrial area. And that is just because that is more of your historic commercial, right? And there's just a lot of opportunity for a new development and redevelopment, a lot of unique, just very cool businesses and very proud owners in that area. And so we had a lot of discussions with the business owners there and some of the residents, and it really came out that a focus on that Pontiac downtown corridor area, those businesses, some of the vacant properties, whatever we can do to try and really create that new sense of place, encourage new business, would be a great outcome. In fact, there's some other things in there in the plan that even talk about, well, how can we try and create new public parking opportunities for people as the businesses are utilized well, or have special events or things of that nature. Also in the Pontiac downtown corridor area, like I said, there is some vacant large parcels around there, and there's possibilities to advocate for some mixed use developments as well. An opportunity where you might have housing with businesses in that area. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, it just we'll have some images here, and this is more or less for each of the areas I talked to, which each of those business districts I talked about. There are a lot of images and conceptual imagery, of what we're trying to look at promoting to increase business activity in each of those areas. In particular, in the screen is a rendering of the Pontiac intersection. So this is the intersection of Sandhills Church Road and Notch Road. And again, this is just conceptual, but it shows the existing businesses and parking lots, and shows just possibly opportunities of where there could be other business development that could take place, as well as opportunities for some mixed use development, maybe even some more housing that goes and helps support some of this future commercial or retail establishments. It might end up being office as well. But again, pictures that do paint 1,000 words, and this is just kind of will help, I guess, the county and the planners. And as we go forward and try and encourage new development in this area, this picture can help encourage those type of elements with future brokers or developers or landowners and work with them. Down in the right-hand corner, that's just another one of the larger properties in the Pontiac corridor area. And that just paints a picture of just conceptually that there is opportunity to create all types of land uses in this area, if so desired, with possibility of commercial up along Two Notch, but also different densities of residential as well to support those commercial uses as you go further back from the roadways. Okay, so now we get down to our housing area, and we did have obviously a lot of input from this, just given the amount of people that live in the subdivisions within our planning area there. And the first one that's brought up there is development road upgrades. And so basically what this is that people came out and said, if new developments happen, new subdivisions happen, developers come in and ask for these, that they really want the county to be mindful on working with those developers, ensuring that as a result of them bringing more people in, more traffic, that roads are really looked at, and make sure that the entrance exit roads to these subdivisions are constructed thoughtfully. And the big thing is adding those XL decel lanes for future safety when those new developments would happen. The Royal Pines identity, we did, like I said, I have a lot of good discussions with the neighborhood there in the Royal Pines, and as part of this neighborhoods plan, creating an identity for the mass amount of people that lived in the subdivision in that area came out as one of the realities they'd like to see. So the plan talks about some possible areas as you come off Two Notch Road into the Royal Pines Estates, maybe create that identity, a little sense of place, possibility of adding some subdivision gateway signs. Infill development, actually the map is on the screen to the right, very small, but it's recognized that not only are there commercial opportunities out there that are vacant properties, there's also a handful amount of vacant properties for residential, and those are recognized in the plan, and it's recognized in there that let's try and create ways of infilling those and getting them built upon. Some of the people came out and said, we want all these to be built upon. We don't want them to be going fallow. It just helps create more of a community feel. So the plan does call those areas out individually and looks to try and build upon those. The Bailey Bill expansion. So for some of you that don't know, the Bailey Bill in South Carolina has been out there for some time by the state. Basically, that authorizes a local government to offer special property tax assessments for rehabilitated historic buildings. Now, that doesn't directly apply to this plan, but the plan does call for investigating this Bailey Bill more with the state and determine if it might be able to be used to allow tax incentives to help include to rehabilitate rental properties or properties themselves. So it's more or less an investigation type intervention for county staff who want to keep pursuing that may help rehabilitate residential properties in the area. Affordable housing. So there is an element in the plan to considerable affordable multifamily uses within some of the larger vacant properties located south of Two Notch Road. And that was the map I pointed to earlier, where there's possibilities for a large mixed-use development more in the Pontiac area south of Two Notch Road. And so this just kind of points out that there's opportunities throughout the Sandhills region for all types of densities, from multifamily to single family as well, and just recognizes opportunities for that type of housing. And then residential enhancement, that just talks about, like I said before, incentives, exploring possible incentives or funding opportunities to specifically enhance residential properties in the planning area. All right. Next one I'll run through real quick, but this plan does look at existing land use and zoning. And for zoning, there is a zoning district out there that's called the Neighborhood Character Overlay District that the county has. And this the plan calls for that, the Neighborhood Character Overlay District might work well, given a lot of these recommendations that we're bringing out in this plan. Because the Neighborhood Character Overlay District allows developers to have a mix of uses, alternative setbacks and offsets for the buildings they propose. Basically allows them to kind of think outside the box in their proposed developments. And like I said, there's possibilities to encourage mixed use developments here, so that zoning district might be helpful. So it's just discussed in the plan. And then the future land use. Some of you might be familiar with the comprehensive plan that Richland County has put together. In that comprehensive plan, there's some unique corridors called out just right around our planning area. One is a mixed use corridor. Another is a neighborhood activity center. And this plan just calls for that, those mixed use corridors and the neighborhood activity centers might be able to be expanded in the neighborhood plan to include like the full Two Notch corridor or down Spears Creek Church Road as well. Because then it'll basically coexist well with some of the interventions that we're trying to encourage in this plan. And then the last thing with future land use is that it calls out in the plan that there's an opportunity to maybe make this whole Sandhills region a priority investment area. Right now, there's a few priority investment areas in the comprehensive plan. And for those who don't know, on the priority investment area in the comprehensive plan, those are basically put in the comprehensive plan for areas that the council from year to year might look to make some more increased capital type investments. And so given the fact that we're talking about a lot of capital investments possibly to implement in Sandhills area, it might be good to also include in the comprehensive plan that this is a priority investment area if the county sees fit. All right, last one, and thank you for bearing with me. I know it's a lot of information. So last one was services and safety. And we had the opportunity to meet with stakeholders from fire department as well as the sheriff's department, and then hear a lot from people about just safety in general. I've talked about safety a bit about relating to traffic, but just say personal safety as well came out. And in talking to the sheriffs and the people there, some of the interventions that are discussed in here are shown on the screen. One was 911 call box implementation. There's a handful of these around the area at this point in time, but the plan calls out for possible key placements in the area, possibly in commercial areas with some of the retailer parking lots to be implemented throughout this region. And working with the Richland Sheriff's Office to determine the key locations for those is encouraged. Same thing with safety, roadway intersection camera systems. And it's found that some of these are found around the area already, but that it could only help increase safety and possible help with any crime issues or something like that as well, if these were implemented in some of the local intersections. One in particular is called out that if a roadway intersection camera system might be helpful at the Two Notch Road and Fashion Drive intersection. There was a lot of input that Two Notch Road, just for safety reasons at night, could be a little bit more well lit. And so discussions in the plan talk about, if there's chances to upgrade streetscaping and things of that nature on 2-notch, to also investigate street lighting, and work with the local utility and what that might look like and how that could work. And then the Royal Pines Estate subdivision really had some good input about some safety in their neighborhood. And two things that came out of that were determine the feasibility of installing some intersection lights at some of the internal Royal Pines Estate subdivision. If you've been through there, it's very rural at night, very dark along those intersections. So that's what they were looking to try and encourage. But then also school safety. At this point in time, there are no pedestrian trails along the more rural roads of this in those areas. And the promotion of working with the school district, where are they dropping off the kids? Is there ways to improve, where the kids wait for the buses, where they're dropped off, and improve that safety in some way was looked upon fondly. And then the last one that really came up from a lot of the people is that, we do have a lot of Spanish speaking people in the community and surrounding area. And we are honestly already know that Richland Sandhills Library already has a lot of Spanish speaking services, but it's just discussed in the plan of whatever coordination can be done to enhance that those services in any way, such as programs for families or children, or section on children's books, found in Spanish, and would be greatly appreciated by a lot of the information that we heard from a lot of the people in the community. So with that, there's a lot more in our plan, obviously, but we kind of want to just stick to, what we heard from the people and these outcomes. There's obviously a lot more detail on every outcome I talked about, a lot more literature and designs in the plan. I encourage you to, go to our website as well. But from there, I think, Brian, I think we're ready to, I think I did see some chat things coming up already, but if you want to take it over and go from there.
Yeah. So we'll start going through any of the comments or questions that were received so far. So obviously, as you can kind of see on your screen here, so please type in any questions or comments that you have. You can type in multiple comments or questions at once. And we'll be going through these individually and trying to address the comment or question as best we can. Also, if you end up having any additional questions or comments for us, you can email them to Jeff, and his information is there on the screen on the slide. So jeff.munkle@both.com. And so with that, let's dive in to the chat. So from Mr. Gilchrist, are there any additional penny tax improvements scheduled for the area? Can the penny tax be used as an incentive as it relates to infrastructure to help with recruitment of businesses? So my understanding, and Jeff, you can probably weigh on this as well, is the only improvements that I'm aware of are going to be for that Spears Creek Church Road area, as well as the recently completed ones for Clemson Road. So to your second question, as it relates to an incentive, I guess it would mean by what exactly do you mean by incentive? So in terms of, there's going to be this future upgrade. So I guess in that way, it's an incentive. But in terms of using the tax as an incentive itself, I believe that's going to be a no. Let's see. So also for Mr. Gilchrist, can the Bailey bill be used as an incentive for commercial/retail development? So in part, yes. So as Jeff mentioned, the Bailey bill is a section of state code that allows a special assessment based on a number of different things. And so one of those is the rehabilitation of historic properties. The other function is for affordable housing. So as that relates to commercial retail development, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that if you did a mixed use development and still met all of the criteria per state code, you could be allowed to do it. But again, I am not a lawyer nor a legal expert, so that would probably need some clarifying, but I think there's always that potential that it could be used as part of the mixed use development if you're redeveloping a commercial property that's going to have a mixture of uses. So let's see here. Just a comment from Mr. Dennis. So I believe that the Sandhills area in Richland County could use a major sports/recreation area. This would be great in attracting more business, revenue, and activities for the citizens of Richland County. So I do believe that's a common comment that we've heard previously in some of the former engagement opportunities that we've had. Recreation was obviously a big component of what we're looking at based on the input that we had previously from the surveys, from the charrettes, and the like. So this is definitely one of those focuses. I'm not sure in terms of a major sporting venue, if that's necessarily something that the plan calls for, but at least having some recreational components and uses within the area for sure. Jeff, anything you might want to add as it relates to that comment?
Really, the big thing that came out of the plan is recognizing a possible community center of sorts, and to continually investigate that. And if that becomes something that could be a reality, to find that right location. But it is mentioned in the plan as more or less of a community center. So, which, as well as turf areas for different sports, whether it's local high school type sports or recreation for younger kids. So that may go hand in hand with the sports recreation area, I guess, in that comment. So it is in there to be investigated, and that is a priority of the community to have something of that sort somewhere in the region.
So another question from Mr. Gilchrist: would the area benefit from a TIF? Jeff, I'll let you address that first, and I can do any follow-up if you'd like.
Well, I guess that all depends, right? When it comes to a TIF, identifying what you want to do with the TIF first is the first element. What do you want to encourage? What do you want to spend possible capital monies on? If it's enhancing the businesses there, we'd also have to want to make sure that there's going to be proper payment. We're going to increase the tax base in wherever geography we put the TIF district on, in order to pay back the money you put in for possible infrastructure or business upgrades. So there are opportunities, I would say, that we identified. Some of those larger vacant properties south of Two Notch up in the Pontiac area that, if they were developed as a mix of uses, would create a substantial amount of tax base, since they are undeveloped at this point in time. So in theory, a TIF for something like that, those large undeveloped properties, might work.
I think that is a good summation, Jeff. I don't have anything to add. So our next comment from Mr. Marvin Price: there should be a traffic signal at North Springs Road and Premier and Ridge Point Drive. There have been many accidents since Premier Road was built. So I think that's something we can take a look at, Mr. Price, in relation to that comment in that intersection, and we'll take a look at it and see what we can potentially do with it as it relates to the plan. So I'm not sure where this location is, and it might be a little bit further outside of the planning area. So we'll just have to take a look at it. Also from Mr. Price, so also from Frashton Drive with the propane tank all the way down to the flyover bridge, can all of those bars and shops be relocated? They look awful. So I think that's just a general kind of issue. So that's one of the things we heard comments on, was just kind of the general upkeep and appearance of a lot of the businesses. And so there's some ways we do try to address that through the recommendations. And some of that stuff would be related to zoning and how potential reinvestment or redevelopment could occur. So that's kind of one of those things where it's just going to depend on what occurs. But as it relates to the propane tank, obviously trying to address that through some type of beautification effort, as Jeff mentioned in the presentation. So specifically looking at that propane tank and seeing what ways we can look to beautify that site specifically in some form or fashion. So let's see. Okay, so from Ms. Eliza Daniel, I'm aware this is out of scope, but would it be appropriate to incorporate TAP funding for sidewalks along North Springs Road, Premier Drive, and Fashion Drive with a pedestrian crossing at the intersection of Premier and North Springs? There's so many neighborhoods just behind Sandhills on this side within a half mile of that wonderful library, but there's no way to walk to it. Do so much for revitalizing Sandhills to make it possible to walk there rather than being forced to drive due to the lack of sidewalks and dangerous road crossings. So that'll be something we'll have to take a look at, but in relation to North Springs and that area, I think it's again a little bit too far out of the planning area that we're looking at currently. In relation to TAP funding, I'm not sure as it relates to the penny projects. Those were projects that were voted on by the referendum, and any changes would ultimately have to be voted on by county council. So that's just a little bit more of a bigger question. Let's see, Ernesto. Have a business in the village of Sandhill since July of last year. Talked to employees about lack of businesses in the area and why any are shut down. Common theme is younger adults in the area, loitering in the mall, and crime. How does increasing the amount of low-income housing in the area not lead to what most people in the area deem to be the reason for the decline of the village of Sandhills? May lead to more consumers in the mall itself and bring new businesses, revenue, but how does crime not become a factor? So, Jeff, do you want to take that one first and I'll follow up?
Sure. Well, the village of Sandhill, it was right outside our boundaries, but as clearly made known in the plan that that's an influence of business in the area. And so the plan, while it doesn't tackle the issues that have been brought up for the last year of businesses leaving that area, or if there, is crime that's leading to that, it does basically talk about how, Two Notch Road and trying to encourage the businesses there and they create a sense of place is more or less, the gateway to the village at Sandhill. And, so how can that influence, what's going on at the village of Sandhill? But yeah, unfortunately that was just outside the boundary. So, those are specific issues that Ernesto was talking about. It doesn't, necessarily tackle. I will say that we brought up at stakeholder meetings with, the sheriff and everything, they were well aware, and they honestly were doing what I thought some great things to try and, have their presence there, but I'm sure everyone perceives and sees things differently, what's going on there from day to day.
Right. And so as it relates to kind of crime and housing, I think that's one of those common misconceptions related to affordable housing and crime. There's not necessarily that direct connection that low-income housing in whatever type, form, or fashion is going to bring crime. That's one of those very common misconceptions related to affordable housing. So let's see. Comment from Ms. Daniel, I guess in response to Mr. Price's comment. And then comment from Ms. Price again. So definitely desperately need a traffic signal at the intersection of Premier and North Springs. So many almost daily accidents here, and the traffic at this intersection has increased greatly over the last year. Yes, so the village at Sandhills is not within the planning boundary. When the boundary was being created, it was not determined that the village was necessary to be included. And so the focus should be on these other areas and not the village itself, which is a larger individual development. Can it be included? So I would say no, mainly because in regards to creating the planning area boundary, there's specific criteria that we look at, one of which is the overall size of the boundary, as well as what is the makeup of everything's within the boundary. So as it relates to having a certain size, does it have a certain number of neighborhoods or identifiable neighborhood areas? And how does that relate back to that overall size? So things like that, as well as being able to identify some initial opportunities for interventions and applying a general cost estimate to some of those things. And so those are kind of the big criteria that make up what decides a plan area that then gets voted on by council. So can it be included? That's would likely be a no. So any other questions at this time? All right. How can we initiate a plan to include Sandhills itself? So in reference to including the village of Sandhill in this plan or creating a new separate plan? So that would be, I think that's a little bit of a bigger issue topic in and of itself, because my understanding is it's a larger development that is more so single property development group owned kind of thing. So one would be, if what are they looking to do with it? What are their thoughts? Things of that nature. But at the same time, would it fit within the criteria of what a neighborhood master plan would entail? So it's a little bit more of a bigger issue question to address. So let's see, from Miss Lane Fancher. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any names. I do apologize for that. So what about Clemson Research Park? Are you in communication with them? What are the plans for that area? Came late to meeting, not sure if that has been discussed. No problem, Ms. Fancher. So one thing, so anyone who had joined this meeting late, we have been recording the conversation, which will be posted on the county's YouTube page tomorrow. But Ms. Fancher, for your question, yes, we have been in communication with them specifically, and really at the moment it's to continue having these conversations with them, see how and what their willingness is to open up their space for the more general public as it relates to things that they already have going on. So Jeff, I think you may have a little bit more that you could add to that and relates to the research park.
Yeah, definitely. So early on, the research facility was a stakeholder. We had personal meetings with them to kind of talk about what their policies are and what they're looking at in the future. As of right now, the university itself basically has a policy for the research area that it is more or less closed to the public, and that's due to people want to know it, but there's the forest areas throughout there, the agriculture areas have a heavy amount of research that professors are working on that take 5 to 10 years, and lands can't be touched or they get compromised, and it's a pretty unique situation what's going on there. Really neat studies that are happening out there. But basically, we talked to them, and they are open that they want to work with partnerships to have different educational programs that happen on that site. But as far as opening up to the public for people to use them as trail systems and all that in the near future, that's going to obviously take a lot more discussion. And at this point in time, due to their research, it's not taking place. But they definitely have been open. And Brian and I just talked to them again just last week again. And want to be a partner with the community, but they are kind of restricted due to the nature of the research that is happening on that property.
So let's see. So before we leave, can you provide a timeline for this plan? Yes. So before we, so after we end the comment section, we will be talking about some of those next steps and what the timeline for this plan through the adoption process is. So we will be discussing that. So Ms. Daniel, who owns the Sandhill Shopping Center property and how do we contact them? So I don't necessarily have any contact information for the owners. That information would, at least in terms of who owns it, would generally be available on the county's GIS page. So you'd be able to look at some of those properties and just take a look at who owns certain things and who doesn't. Let's see, so Karen, Ms. Sprayberry, so you have interventions prioritized as high, medium, low. How would you move forward with those? So the way that those prioritization rankings work is really gives staff a guide in terms of where and when we should be looking to implement those. So for interventions that are prioritized as a higher intervention, so obviously looking at them kind of in as a whole, you know, this one maybe has a little bit more emphasis than something with a lower one. But a lower one could be more of a low-hanging fruit versus a high one. So it's really just going to depend on what that intervention is and of itself. So what is the feasibility of it at this time? What is the cost constraints potentially tied with that? So there's a few different factors that staff would be considering in terms of that implementation, but generally it provides that guide of when we should be looking at it. So in terms of, you know, if we could only do 10 things out of the entire plan, for instance, you know, we most likely we would be taking all the ones that would be listed as a high priority versus, you know, the 10 that are all low priority, if that makes sense. So rather, how did you determine the ranking easiest to accomplish, short-term versus long-term? So it's a little bit of kind of both of those, more so based on the input that we had received and the way that folks were commenting on those. So really looking at what all does it entail, what all is included, so that potential concept and scope, as well as what some of those cost constraints associated with it might be. So yes, in part to that, but also based on the input that we have received in relation to those. Jeff, was there anything you wanted to add to those two questions?
No, I think you covered it. I would only add kudos to Karen because that means she read through the whole entire document because that was at the end.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, any other comments at this time? So due to help with the beautification of the areas around the Sandhill Shopping Center. So I think in general, there's a couple of different things. So one, attending this meeting is always kind of that first step. Because now that you're kind of, you know about it, you want to be involved, that's really a first step in these types of things. Next thing is really kind of identifying who some of those partners might be. So for things like this, you know, the county and the variety of our departments, so whether it's the planning department, government and community services, or the public works with their solid waste division, you know, how could we create these partnerships for looking at some of these issues? But then also looking at outside entities. So for instance, people like Palmetto Pride that host kind of corridor cleanups, they provide grants. So there's really a variety of different things. And Ms. Daniels, if you want, feel free to send me a direct message on here with your contact information. And we can kind of discuss this further offline for some of the things that ideas you might have as it relates to your community or the larger Sandhills community as well. So there's a variety of different things that you can look to do. It's just going to really depend on, so what's your ultimate goal and what are you looking to achieve? So Mr. Dennis, we're going to talk about this at our next commission meeting. Yes. So I guess this is a good transition point into the next steps. So I don't want to steal any Jeff's thunder, so I'm gonna hand it back over to him real quick, and can add some more information as I need to as we go through this. So Jeff, we want to take us through some of our next steps then?
Sure. Not much thunder to steal here, Brian, but really where we're at right now, you've heard, we've been going over this for, a good year and a half. We're at the point of looking to take some final comments. I've been receiving some comments through the website online, as well as the comments tonight. And we'll be looking to kind of finalize the plan, add anything new to the interventions or just the balance of the plan here in the next week. Brian will be taking this plan to the Plan Commission and ultimately the Council for adoption as well here in the coming weeks then, after we more or less sift through any last comments that might come up. And then from that point, it'll be on to implementation of interventions from year to year. The county has staff in place to look at these neighborhood plans and the different interventions and see what things can be tackled from year to year, given budgets and the people that are in place.
Yes. So as it relates to that adoption process, so our next step, as Jeff mentioned, after this meeting, consolidating any more comments, making any necessary revisions that we need to the plan. We'll be taking this before the Planning Commission at their May 5th meeting. I believe it's May 5th. I don't want to make sure I get that date wrong. May 3rd, excuse me, May 3rd. Had the day. So the May 3rd Planning Commission meeting, which is going to be the next meeting of the Planning Commission. So that will also be another opportunity for public input on this plan. So that is a public meeting that folks will be able to submit comments in relation to the plan at. And then following the Planning Commission meeting will be public hearing and first reading at the County Council May 25th meeting. So that will be really the final public comment period as it relates to this plan. So that'll really be the last public opportunity that people will have to provide any comments or input as it relates to the ReDiscover Sandhill plans itself. And so from that meeting, assuming council gives it first reading, it will then move on and need 2 additional readings before it is finally adopted as it relates to the plan itself. And so really we're looking at having this plan adopted before the end of June, and then from there beginning to move into the intervention of it. And so the intervention of the plan is not something that will happen overnight. It is very much a long-term phased implementation approach. So we're really looking at a 5, 10 year, 15-year window of how these different interventions get implemented, if not longer. And so another thing to also keep in mind is these are recommendations. And so not necessarily everything that is implemented or recommended will be implemented. So there may be some things that, okay, after exploring it or taking a look at it, is not feasible and is not doable. But for the most part, staff will be beginning to look to implement the various recommendations beginning within the next year. So seeing what things we can start to tackle and then go from there. But that's generally the next steps and really the best timeline in terms of the adoption as well as the implementation. And so there's some things that we'll be looking to try to get rolling rather quickly, and some things that are going to take a little bit longer to try to achieve. But so again, with that, we thank you all for your time this evening. And again, if you have any additional comments or questions, you can email them to Jeff. And if you know anyone who looked to attend this meeting but was unable to, we have been recording. So we will have that available on the county YouTube page later on. So with that, we appreciate your time. Jeff, any closing remarks you would like to add?
No, thank you, Brian. Thank you all for listening tonight and attending.
Well, we hope everyone has a great evening and we thank you for participating. And again, there will be 2 additional input opportunities for those interested at the Planning Commission meeting and the zoning public hearing for County Council. So thank you all, and we appreciate your time this evening.